I was thinking as I was driving in yesterday with Richard, the Wall Street Journal had a supplement yesterday called The Future of Cities. And the first article said, here are the most 5 innovative cities in the world. And normally you would think when you'd see an article like that, particularly from the Wall Street Journal, they would be talking a lot about tech companies and research and development and new innovations. A lot of the cities they recommended was really about the quality of place. And one of the cities they recommended was Vancouver for its walkability. And so as I was driving in yesterday, what first struck me was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, driving in from the airport to here. You're like the place of bike trails. It's, for whatever reason, a couple decades ago, some really smart decisions were made here, and you can really see the fruit of that labor and the effect on this community. So congratulations for that, because everyone is sort of fighting to basically make their place more livable, bikeable, walkable, and you've got great coffee around the block, so you're already there. So what I want to talk about today is the rise of innovation districts, which is really the new spatial geography of innovation, not just in the United States, but around the world. And in a sense, what's happening is we're seeing the evolution of how cities, and this is not just about large cities, large, medium, and small cities and metropolitan areas evolve their economies. If you go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, we had industrial districts in the United States and Europe. Manufacturing was essentially enmeshed in the urban fabric, and many of these cities really were manufacturing towns. After the Second World War, we moved to essentially a research park model and a science park model. Some of this was the impact of our energy labs, some of it was the impact of our military installations, but everything was pretty much dispersed in terms of the innovative economy, isolated, sort of auto-dependent, and these research parks and science parks are really populated across the country. I think we're now moving to something, and this is a phrase that we did not invent, innovation districts. It comes out of Barcelona in Spain. I think we're now moving to a really interesting model where a lot of our innovative companies and entrepreneurs are locating back around research institutions and universities and medical centers because of the need for networked research and networked innovation. So we're moving to a different kind of model, and hopefully you can hear this.
The geography of innovation is shifting. To find an innovative economy 20 years ago, a worker needed to drive to a secluded research park, work in isolation, and keep ideas secret. Today, proximity is everything. Workers want to be in urban places that are walkable, bikeable, hyper-caffeinated, where they can bump into other workers and share ideas. Firms also want to be close to other firms, research labs, and universities in collaborative spaces so that smart ideas can be turned into smart products for the market. Innovation districts are this century's productive geography. They are both competitive places and cool spaces, and they will transform your city and metropolis.
So I'm 56 years old. I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons. If you can't animate it, it's not really worth talking about. Of course, I grew up on Speed Racer, which is a little different from the innovation districts. So here's a sort of starting definition of this. And frankly, this is evolving because this is not a government program. This is a market dynamic. And therefore, the way it'll manifest itself in a Bloomington normal is different than in a Baltimore, is different than in a Boston, right? But the general gist of this is we are seeing the collapse back of entrepreneurs and sort of R&D-led firms to these small geographies. Some of these are really the geographies of the downtown. Sometimes they extend out a little bit beyond that. But what the innovative economy wants, partly because the demographic preferences of talented workers have changed in the United States. I mean, they want to be in places where you can live, work, and play. But frankly, I think the bigger idea here is that we're moving from a closed innovation system, keep your secret secret, to an open innovation system where you want to be constantly co-creating and sharing discoveries for the market. And that revalues proximity, density, authenticity, in a word, cities. So these generally tend to be in these mixed use, almost radically mixed use kind of places, and we can walk half a block and we can see that kind of environment here. We see three kind of models sort of emerging in the United States and Europe, and I think you clearly fit one of them. One is just the anchor plus. You have a university, and a lot tends to congregate around it, not just consumption and retail and housing, but innovation. You know, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was the former senator from New York, basically said, if you want to build a world-class city, get a university, wait 200 years, and something will happen. You know, I think the product cycles are moving a little faster today, so I'm not sure you have to wait 200 years. But the Anchor Plus model, you know, think Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, think Drexel and UPenn in Philly, but it really is the power of these anchors, and particularly universities. In the hot markets, what happens, and this is primarily in Boston or Seattle or San Francisco, everything initially congregates around these anchors, and then prices go up. They go up so high that the innovative economy needs to pop out somewhere else. So that's the reason why South Lake Union is developing in Seattle, Hunters Point in San Francisco, the Seaport in Boston. The reason why we really know this is happening is if you go to Research Triangle Park right now outside of Raleigh-Durham, really the iconic science park in the United States, carved out of 7,000 acres of pine forest in the late 1950s, they're urbanizing the park. They're urbanizing the park because a lot of tech companies are saying to them, you know, our workers don't want to drive out here in the middle of traffic, not be able to get the cup of coffee, essentially, not be able to sort of bump and mingle with people from other firms when they can do that in downtown Durham or downtown Raleigh or downtown Chapel Hill. So something profound is happening around the geography of innovation. And it's happening here, and it's happening primarily in Europe and Israel and Canada. For some reason, a lot of the developing countries are still sort of copying our science park model from 30 or 40 years ago. So this is really sort of a mature economy effect. So how do you deconstruct this, and what does a district have, right? It really has three kinds of assets which sort of come together. And you have a lot of them here: economic, physical, and networking. And when you put all those together and you have a risk-taking culture, capital is absolutely essential to this, risk-taking capital, you have an innovation ecosystem. So the economic stuff is pretty easy to describe. This is Drexel. You know, you go to 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, you get out of your train, you're basically at the Drexel University, right? It's a great cooperative university focused on a whole range of advanced kinds of thinking and action. Well, who wants to be around these universities? High-value research-oriented firms. This is a firm called Cofactor Genomics in St. Louis. It wants to be around Washington University. This is highly creative. This is video gaming in Philadelphia. Why are they there? Because Drexel has a great program on video gaming. So, I mean, the talent is basically concentrated and the companies congregate around it. And this is small batch manufacturing. So essentially what's going on, because of technological advancement, manufacturing at the advanced level is coming back to the United States. The era of cheap, where we just outsourced and offshored everything to Asia, is not completely over, but it's being mitigated by the era of smart. This is a company called Archaic. It's in the Boston Seaport. The robot is called Artie. They make big ceramics for hotels like this one. You know, you walk into a hotel, there's a big sort of ceramic on the wall. It's made by this company. There are 10 designers in the front room, there's a robot in the middle, and there are 10 people doing the logistics and marketing. It used to take 500 people to do this in Guatemala or other portions of Central America. So small batch manufacturing at one level, and then high value advanced manufacturing. I was at the Tesla facility about a month ago in Fremont, California. That's coming back to the United States. The Internet of Things, software mingled up with the hardware of manufacturing. The second piece is physical, because we used to think about that innovative economy as something that just happened again in an isolated part of our metropolitan areas. But this is essentially the new kind of innovative space that we see. On the left is Barcelona, really the initial innovation district in a part of the city that had been an industrial sort of wasteland. On the right is Eindhoven. Eindhoven is a city in Holland. It's the 5th largest city in Holland. It's about 750,000 people at the metro scale. It had been the home to Philips Lighting. In the mid-1990s, Philips decided to move all their manufacturing to where else? I mean, to Asia. The place collapsed. 20 years later, it's the most innovative city in Europe. So manufacturing leaving does not kill a place if you're able to basically build off your knowledge and your innovation platform. In the middle is a small American city called Detroit. This is downtown Detroit today. And if you haven't been to Detroit recently, it is a very different place. Not in the 138 square miles of the entire city, but in the greater downtown, which is about 7 square miles. This is Campus Martius. It's a park, public space, right in the middle of downtown. So public space matters, private space matters. This is the sort of shared lab space in Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a co-working space of sorts. Basically, all the equipment these people use are very, very expensive, so it's shared, right? It cuts the cost for startups and entrepreneurs. And essentially what we're doing is building spaces where scientists and researchers and entrepreneurs can focus on their science and not focus on the business. That's taken care of by others. This is District Hall in the Boston Seaport. It's built with concessions for developers. It's shared open space for entrepreneurs and innovators to come and co-create discoveries for the market. On the left is your coffee during the day, alcohol at night, right? I mean, that's the way most innovation happens, I presume. And then in the back are the sort of gathering places for people. In some places, there are some major infrastructure that has to happen, or smaller infrastructure, frankly, like the trails and the bike lanes. This is Stockholm. Stockholm, like the United States, decided to build a lot of freeways through the middle of their cities. In one case, they really divided up what was sort of a natural medical district. So now they're decking over the freeway, which is some of the most valued property in Europe, and building up, well, probably what will be the most advanced hospital system in the world when it opens in the next year. So big infrastructure. And think about going back to Philly, decking over the rail lines coming out of 30th Street Station, or a lot of other freeway roads that run right in the middle of town. So this is going to come to the United States in a lot of our cities. The last bit is networking. So you can have the economic base, you can have the physical sort of environment, but at the end of the day, people need to engage with each other seamlessly to innovate. And there's really two kinds of networking that goes on. This is Eindhoven, therefore you have complete lack of diversity, but this is a place where you have sort of strong ties. These are all techies. None of us in this room, maybe there are some, can understand a word any of these people are saying. I mean, right? I mean, they're basically building the most advanced medical devices that will ultimately we'll all put into our bodies. So this is strong ties, same background, same expertise, same discipline, same guild. This is what happens in a lot of innovation districts. It's weak ties. An entrepreneur meets someone with a design background, or someone with a media background, or someone with an accounting background. You're really good at accounting here, right? I mean, there's a lot of sort of intersection of different disciplines, right, that enable sort of different kinds of innovations. Most of the innovation in the United States doesn't happen within traditional clusters of companies. It happens between clusters of companies. Again, think about the Internet of Things. Think about how our cars are now computers on wheels, which means that people like me don't even know how to use them. I still want to get a car where you roll it down, but minor problem. So this is what's happening. People from different backgrounds are beginning to come together, usually in the shadow of our universities, to create discoveries for the market, and allowing for the programming in our startup spaces, in our co-working spaces, in our accelerators, where we can basically enable that innovation is really critical. Again, you put all that together, and you have risk-taking capital, which we have quite a bit of in the United States. You have an innovation ecosystem. And the thing about the innovative geography returning to the core of our cities means you get other benefits of density. When you sort of have science parks 30 miles away or 20 miles away or 10 miles away from the downtown, people just go there. They go to their corporate facility. They go in the basement for lunch, to a corporate cafeteria. There's no real recycling of income, right? You come to a downtown, a whole bunch of other very positive effects begin to happen around residential, around retail, et cetera. So let's just go to one of these places. And I decided just to choose Philly because we're doing a lot of work there right now, and I figured a lot of folks here probably have been to Philly. This is University City. This is where Drexel and UPenn are located. It's right behind 30th Street Station to the north. There's tremendous amount of population growth. In the space of a city, this is 1 square mile. Philadelphia is 130 square miles in the city, right? This is like 0.01% of the metropolis, and it's where all the growth is going in Philadelphia. Whatever other growth is going into Center City. This is the old part of Philadelphia that we all know about, right? Declaration of Independence, et cetera. They're having tremendous growth. So you put Center City together with University City, that's how Philadelphia is growing. We got to have a Google map if we're going to talk about innovation districts. So let's just zoom in and just show you what this sort of looks like. You can see the old part of Philadelphia to the right. What we're focused on is really this bit, Drexel, University of Pennsylvania. So your two main anchors. University of Pennsylvania has one of the largest research programs in the United States funded by the national government. There's a whole bunch of other institutions that sort of congregate around them. This is all legacy, right? This was done decades ago, right? But the hospitals, other advanced institutions, the Veterans Medical Center, right? This is the transit and the regional rail. So all these places are basically giving people options. You could walk to work, you could bike to work, you could take a local transit, you could take a regional rail, or you could drive. And then finally, here are all the sort of co-working spaces, the University City Science Center, Benjamin's Desk, and then you have Comcast up here. And Comcast, is a cable company. But frankly, most of these major companies, whether it's Comcast, whether it's Amazon, whether it's State Farm, these are tech companies today, essentially. There's an enormous innovation happening within companies that we never really thought of as tech companies, right? So Comcast, which is now building 3 towers, has now sort of extended out the University City District right into the middle of downtown. It's like a new geography being created in the heart of Philadelphia. So how do you build an innovation district? So what we've been doing at Brookings with Project for Public Spaces is first trying to measure and audit the assets of different places. Not to say, Philadelphia is great and, some other place is terrible, but just to give everyone a sense of what's your starting point. There's someone once said, I think it was Bertrand Russell, that the sign of an educated person is to be deeply moved by statistics. So this is the part where you probably should just go to sleep. I'm not going to show you a lot. I'll also quote Dolly Parton, right, which is really great American economic development strategist, which is figure out who you are and do it on purpose. So it's really critical to measure what you have and then to move from it. The first piece about measurement, before you even run any numbers, is to have a network of people. So this is not about just saying, okay, let's just relegate the measuring and the auditing to a few people, and then the rest of us will just sort of, take it and sort of run. This is really about building a network. Cities are networks. They're not governments. It's public, private, and civic together. So in Boston, what we saw was the mayor really leading the effort to sort of extend this really hot, innovative economy into the Boston seaport, right? In Raleigh-Durham, as I said before, Research Triangle Park, it's one nonprofit entity running the park, basically trying to figure out how do you survive in a world where innovation is collapsing back to the core. And then in Philadelphia, it's a more chaotic sort of structure where you have the universities, you have business improvement districts, you have various hospitals, all trying to work together to collaborate to create this new amazing space. So once you have a network, you audit your assets. This is where the measurement comes in. So what we're trying to build at Brookings is an audit tool that basically anyone can apply to their own particular place and then measure these critical assets. What are your economic assets, right? I mean, which part of the economy are you really good at? I mean, a lot of places wake up and say, we're going to be the Silicon Valley of X. Well, no one's really going to be the Silicon Valley, right? I mean, that's its own special place. But you could be the best 21st century version of yourself, which means what are your particular economic assets, competitive advantages? And what's really interesting, in addition to looking at firm size and how they relate to the anchors, is the interplay between your companies, your clusters, and the competencies of your universities. When you have those three working together, a lot of magic happens. So, I mean, we're a block away from a university here, right? And trying to understand how companies and clusters of companies work with that university and researchers and faculty and students to continually create discoveries for the market, that's your economic asset. Physical, we could look at various things. Broadband access obviously matters a lot, right? Internet connectivity matters a lot. The use of land and the move towards more radical mixed use, because that's where you really have almost a physical environment that is sort of tailor-made for the collisions between people. Transit matters. But also what matters in a place this size is walking, biking, et cetera, right? I mean, you've got a size that enables a lot of different kinds of modalities. And the last piece is networking. And networking, can be measured in lots of different ways. What kind of co-working spaces you have, how late are your restaurants and bars open? For a long time we thought that the consumption economy, right, was really separate from the innovation economy. Well, the innovative economy just happens somewhere else, and it happens mostly with people who have doctorate degrees, and we never really know what they're talking about. But actually, the innovative economy is much more democratized than we've understood in the past. A lot of the people driving it don't have doctorate degrees. What they actually have is sub-baccalaureate degrees. They have credentials. They have coding. They're really good at software development. And they want coffee in the morning and alcohol at night, right? So, I mean, you really have got to look at a much broader mixing and mashing up of assets. And the last piece is to sort of look around and see who's doing smart things that you could potentially copy or adapt and tailor. If we go to St. Louis today, what has happened in St. Louis is Washington University, St. Louis University, Barnes Jewish Medical Center, and the Botanical Gardens all got together about a decade ago and said, look, if we don't collaborate to compete, this city ain't coming back, right? They collaborate together. They focus on 200 acres in the heart of the city. They set up a nonprofit entity called Cortex, right? Today, if you go to St. Louis, it's one of the most exciting, vibrant areas of the city. You've got the kind of small batch manufacturing I talked about before. You've got an innovation hub where hundreds of people are coming together on a regular basis to share ideas and talk about firm growth. So innovation, but collaboration across institutions really matters. Placemaking, Barcelona, look, it's easy to look at Europe. They have it sort of almost in their DNA. But Barcelona took a part of the city, which if we went there 30 years ago, we all would have concluded this will never come back, right? I mean, it was just marred by rail lines, elevated freeways. There was really nothing there. And they've tended to co-locate a group of anchor institutions. They've decked over the rail lines. They tore down the freeway. It's remarkable what they've done to create a vibrant place and almost like a new downtown. Inclusion in Baltimore, the innovative economy really works for a very broad segment of our citizens. I mean, for a long time, we thought the tech economy, again, was only for people with certain kinds of skills that none of us would ever be able to access. Actually, a good portion of this economy is accessible for people with sub-baccalaureate degrees. What's beginning to happen is the community colleges, which are critical to this, are moving back into these innovation hubs. So if you go to Baltimore right now, on the west side, around the University of Maryland, it's a pretty vibrant health cluster. The Baltimore City Community College has moved into the main sort of life sciences building. And they literally have posters which said, if you want your next job, get in the elevator and go to floor number 5. I mean, this is how crazy it is, right? You never have to leave this building, I guess, in order to thrive and prosper. And the last piece is capital investment. Indianapolis is not that far from here. They're building an incredible innovation hub around the downtown. BioCrossroads is an intermediary that helps the researchers, the health companies, the investors, the city government all come together and sort of get on the same page around growth and development going forward, right? So this is an incredibly successful model. Frankly, when we look globally, BioCrossroads in Indianapolis is in like the top 5 of intermediaries that work on this innovative economy. So there are lots of strategies. There are more happening, and it's organic. Again, there's no government program called innovation districts because it's really about networks of business, civic, entrepreneurial, investor, academic, yes, government. Government's critical, particularly around the placemaking, coming together and collaborating to compete. So I think as we go forward this morning, the question is, can you build an innovation district that obviously takes from examples around the United States and Europe, but is really customized to what makes this place special? I mean, you're a university city, or cities, right? I mean, that's what is your raison d'etre. And you also have State Farm, which, in my view, is a tech company, right? Because it's got to continually innovate in the insurance business and beyond, right, to stay competitive. So there's probably multiple areas where you already have traction, and that provides the platform for a different kind of economic growth going forward, a different kind of quality of place, and really the enabling of people to come together and co-create for the market. So, we at Brookings basically just observed something that was happening. We didn't go back into our cubicles and say, what would be a really good idea, and a good idea virus to sort of set out across the world. We just basically looked across the United States and Europe and said, something is happening now in the past 5 or 7 years, which is radically different from the last 50 or 60 years. Why is it happening? Where is it happening? And what can we do about it? I think this is probably one of the most productive kind of trends and dynamics that has been unleashed in the last 5 or 10 years. And I think every place in the United States, particularly those with a university base, can take advantage of it. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. Comments, criticisms, suggestions?
What we're going to do is ask anybody that has a question to come up to the microphone, introduce yourself, let Mr. Katz know what agency your company you represent.
And if you want to tweet hashtag innovation districts or LinkedIn or anything else. But if you don't ask a question, I'll ask the question of myself, but that's always a little, little embarrassing. Who wants to start? Thanks.
I was really hoping I was going to come up with something to say before I got up here. But I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Katz, for your talk. It's really exciting. I'm Mike with the Bloomington Normal Angel Investor Network in the Slingshot co-work space uptown Normal. So we try to live this, we try to do this all the time. So let me see if I can come up with a question here.
And I'm going to Google Slingshot as you do that.
Yeah, I've got some tweets here, some quotes around stuff he said. I'm like, yes, co-working. So we've got events that happen regularly there, and you mentioned in the networking kind of the soft connections or
Yes.
connection there.
Yes.
So I guess the question would be, what type of events and kind of like event energy type schedule do you think is like the most important?
So there's a lot of models out there, and what might be of interest. I mean, and frankly, 10 of us could leave right now, get in a bus, go up to 1871, which is a co-working space in downtown Chicago, and talk to Howard Tolman and his folks and say, hey, what's working for you folks? Because what's interesting about these co-working spaces is whatever they did last year is not what they're doing this year. I mean, they're constantly innovating, and they're continuously innovating. And they're mostly basically customizing their programming to what the entrepreneurs and the startups and the scale-ups and the larger companies want. So if you go to 1871, which is in the Merchandise Mart in downtown Chicago, what's really interesting is it started when I first started going there as like a typical kind of startup space. And people from the startup companies wanted, certain kinds of programming around the kind of knowledge and expertise they needed, right? Now what's really interesting is you have major companies like United Airlines situating themselves in the middle of this co-working space so that they can have access to talented workers. And then you have the major universities, right, from all over Chicago, because they don't tend to be that concentrated in Chicago like they are in Philly or Pittsburgh or Atlanta. They now have space in the co-working area so they can bring in students. And some of the most interesting entrepreneurial activity is happening in universities with students. Sometimes I don't think they ever go to class anymore. They're just all inventing companies. The American model, right? And so I think my suggestion would be to go to 1871, go down to Cortex in St. Louis, get 5 or 7 people around here to be a task force, figure out what's the best, because those are 2 of the best in the country right now, right? And then come back and say, how do we customize it to what we have? And this is in some ways a small place that with a university has a really good opportunity to customize to what is your culture, what's your niche. We walked around last night to your 1937 downtown theater. I mean, how many places have a functioning movie theater in the middle of their downtown? I mean, that could become a really exciting kind of venue for entrepreneurial pitches to investors, et cetera, et cetera. Question?
Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Marcus Ritchie, and I'm with the Ecology Action Center. I have a planning background, and so if we don't want to wait 150 to 200 years, get a university to come and have stuff grow organically, how can planners or other resource managers drive or help create a space, a region either within an urban area or a regional one between areas or in a metropolis? What planning tools would you suggest? A couple, 3 economic development zones, business improvement districts, mixed use zoning stuff to make it so that people think, they might not give us dollars to come here, but we're going to make it a space that is conducive to this.
Well, I think that's a great question. And, you've got a lot of planning assets here, both within the university and really within governmental entities. So the market, again, I think the market is revaluing certain things. And it's not just because, we're in some kind of fad of the moment. The millennials want a bike, so we better buy bikes and build bike lanes. I think we're in a more structured shift toward an open, innovative, networked economy, right? And again, when that happens, when you move from a situation where a company innovates by whatever the people within the company can co-create together, that's one model, right? That's the model we had essentially from 1950 to 2000. When you go to a model where a major company basically is saying, and it could be a GE or it could be a pharma company or it could be, it could be Ford Motor, right? Any company is basically saying, if we're just the sum of our employees, we can't win globally. If we're the sum of our employees plus all the other smart people, right, that we can engage both where we're located and beyond, then we're going to have a competitive edge. When you move to that kind of system, you revalue proximity, density, mixed use, authenticity, vitality, vibrancy, connectivity, all the stuff that matters to cities. All the reasons why cities exist, essentially. That's why this is happening. I wrote a piece for the Harvard Business Review a couple months ago, mostly because someone sent me an email from Atlanta, Midtown Atlanta, where Georgia Tech is located, and they say, something's going on here. We have corporations locating their research centers right in the shadow of our university, right? And, we're not even really going out and recruiting anyone. They're just coming, right, because of this open, innovative model. You go to Pittsburgh, right, albeit Carnegie Mellon, top computer science, university in the world. Who's in Pittsburgh right now? Google, Uber. Uber came to Pittsburgh and stole the entire robotics department, of Carnegie Mellon, which is actually a good thing for Pittsburgh, because then Pittsburgh had to go out and get more really smart people, right? Facebook, everyone, they're in Pittsburgh. Silicon Valley has just moved to Pittsburgh, right? So, but what they want is that cluster effect, that quality of life, all the things that seem soft, livability, walkability, bikeability, it's a nice thing to have, but we're going to do the real work of the economy. Actually, that is the real work of the economy. So I think what we have to get is the physical planners, right, who have great expertise in this area, with the innovative companies and the entrepreneurs, right, so that this gets real close to what they're thinking about and their niches in the economy and who they're working with. And really create sort of a magical mix. And I think we have most of the tools, but the tools are not cookie cutter, right? You just don't say, well, here's what Bakery Square looks like in Pittsburgh, just bring it to Bloomington Normal. I think what you want to do is take some of these tools and then adapt and tailor it to what is unique and distinctive about this place. Again, you're already a little bit ahead of the curve because of the trails and the bike spaces and so forth. Most places are just starting to do that at scale. You already have it at scale, right? So you've got a little more ability here, I think, to sort of focus in on really this bit around here and then connect it up to the downtown of Bloomington. And you already have, we were just talking about it at breakfast, a 2012 feasibility study for connecting these two downtowns. Dust that off, put it back, start really trying to get the planners to help you not just design something, but implement it. So there's some really positive momentum already here and some smart work that was already done. You don't have to start from scratch. You've got some possibilities.
My name is Larry Deeds. I'm the president of Illinois State University, and I just want to say how much I've enjoyed your comments this morning. I'm a relative newcomer to this community. I've been here for 5 years. The thing that I've really discovered in those 5 years is that there really is a spirit of cooperation between universities, between the community, the corporations, the healthcare sector, on and on and on. We are not a Research One Carnegie classification university, though we do high-quality research at the university, and we have the Means Entrepreneurship Center in our College of Business. So we have elements of what you're really talking about. The thing that to me, as I've viewed your presentation, most of it I've been to both Drexel and also to University of Pennsylvania and seen that university city community. Obviously, most of the examples that you gave were in major urban areas with Research One universities, but I appreciate your comments there about things can be scalable, and it's a matter of individuals coming together and customizing what we think is best for this community and figuring out how the university or other educational institutions in the community can really help with that. So I guess I've heard encouragement from you relative to our future in this whole area. And I guess my question is just, is it all scalable? Can you see these kinds of things happening here? I can, but you've seen a lot of examples. So please address that and give us some affirmation that we have great assets around here, and it's a matter of coming together and figuring out our own future.
Well, I really appreciate these comments. And I'll just say right off the bat that, when I started this work about 5 or 7 years ago, I was, purposefully trying to basically make a statement that what was happening in Europe can not just be adapted to the United States, but could be improved dramatically in the United States because of our network of Tier 1 research institutions and so forth. I've now come to the conclusion that our assets are much more plentiful in this country than we've been led to understand. And, your community is more typical, really, of the country than a Pittsburgh with a Carnegie Mellon or an Atlanta with a Georgia Tech or a Cambridge with an MIT. I mean, we have tremendous assets in this country, right? These state universities, occasionally your state legislature decides to fund them. I'll put that for another conversation. There is nuttiness in the land, particularly in Springfield. But so we have our state universities, we have our community colleges, we have major companies like State Farm, which again are tech companies. They're tech companies, right? We have to redefine what we think about as technology-driven clusters and companies. And then you've got what is this really magic of a collaborative spirit. People like this place. They want to improve this place. They care about the place. There's a commitment to the betterment of the community. So I don't know what will come out of that collaborative effort, right? And between the mixing of what has been traditionally been economic development over here and placemaking and transportation over here and some other kind of intervention over here. I mean, but I do think that a little bit of, searching in a collaborative spirit across sectors, across public, private, and civic leaders, a little bit of local capital put towards this. You don't have to wait for Washington. By the way, they're not coming. And you clearly don't have to wait for Springfield, right? It's going to happen here. The smart stuff that's going to happen is going to happen primarily because of the people in this room and some other rooms coming together and deciding This is who we are. We have these assets. This is how we improve them 2x. Here's how we improve them 5x. And here's how we improve them 50x. That's the conversation that has to happen. And I guarantee you, if you've got 10, 25, 50 people committed to this and taking some of the planning that's already been done and just doing it, this is going to be a place that's on the map relatively soon. So my view of what place is going to have innovation districts has dramatically expanded in the last 2 or 3 years from traveling around the US and Europe and seeing the varieties of assets that people have. Next question.
Thank you. In this past year, in this community, thanks to some effort on the innovation area that you heard Dr. Dietz talk about, in our high schools, a program has started with high schoolers on innovation. These are kids that haven't figured out they can't do something. They think they can.
Right.
And I'm interested in hearing what you have seen in other communities of how we foster this in younger people. We have a lot of parents and grandparents in this room that want their kids to be those successes. So would you address that, please?
Yeah, I think something is dramatically happening in the American education system, and I think it's actually starting in pre-kindergarten. I mean, the more we expose our kids to these rapidly changing technological advancements, the more we're going to find that they just, completely surprise us. The easy kind of interventions to do, we call them fab labs, we call them maker spaces. They're usually done in close collaboration with universities because the universities tend to have the kind of equipment, but they're usually run by nonprofits where, you set up a bunch of after-school efforts. There's a great one in San Diego. I mean, they're really all over the country. And you give, 20 or 25 students who clearly have the knack for the tinkering, right, and for the inventing and the making, to be exposed to the most advanced technology that we have at our fingertips. I mean, if you look at the Wall Street Journal this morning, big article about Ford Motor Company and the next generation of 3D printing. Obviously, probably no one in this room is going to ever understand what they're doing. But with regard to some of the 3D printing in some of these fab labs, it gives kids an introduction. I mean, I call it like 21st century shop, if anyone ever remembers shop, right? Probably there's a pretty large percentage of our kids, particularly in our high schools, who've already zoned out, because the way in which we're teaching them doesn't seem to really give them relevance. But they're really good at certain things, and if we can expose them to these new technologies, particularly around making, right? Particularly around making, I think they will continually surprise us. Those are the companies of the future, frankly. It's that sort of intermix of design, technology, working with your brain and your hands simultaneously. I was almost kicked out of shop, so this would not have done much for me. But I know quite a few people I was growing up with that it would have made a hell of a lot more sense for them to be given these opportunities, right? Instead, it was like a track of just, you've got to take the SATs, you got to take the, I think we've got to open up education, blast it open, and give much more of our kids just a general exposure to technology, and then a portion of the kids who show that they have a certain affinity for making particular exposure to these new kinds of technologies. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't need a government program for this. It just has to happen through a collaborative entities.
Good morning. My name is Michaela Harris, and I am one of those high schoolers that's a part of the Innovative Entrepreneurs Program. We are here today thanks to the angel investors in Bloomington Normal back there. And my question was definitely kind of similar, but I would like to know how you think that secondary and elementary education impacts these innovation hubs and areas.
Well, that's a great question. I think there's a synergistic relationship between these hubs and between elementary and secondary education. Again, think about the science park model, right? Science park model was out of sight, out of mind. So there was really no interaction for the most part with anything because everything was sort of isolated and cut off. Now we're talking about innovation being in the heart of our cities. So when you're in Philadelphia, again, this is a big city kind of phenomenon, you walk 10 minutes, you're in a neighborhood of the highest poverty, right? So now that the innovative economy is really growing in that part, or in Baltimore, or Indianapolis, any of these places, what we're seeing are new ties between companies, universities, and our pre-K, elementary, and secondary. The programming in these schools are beginning to change to reflect the technological advancement of these companies and hubs. So I think we're at the early phase of this. And again, education isn't too important to leave to the educators, right? I mean, in a way, what we really want is for more parts of our society to take responsibility for education. And again, doing not just, okay, I'm suddenly going to become a history teacher. That ain't going to happen. But if you have a proficiency in technology, you know, and you can lend that, and you can particularly devise and design curricula. There are high schools in Chicago that I've been to where the manufacturing companies have come in and basically written a curricula, right? Brought in their own machinery into the high schools. Kids can graduate in high schools in some of the toughest parts of Chicago and get a job earning $50,000, $60,000 a year because of the lack of skilled workers. And that's just within the manufacturing sector. This cuts across multiple sectors. So I do think the spatial geography collapsing back to the hubs of our cities and metro areas enables us to link to these educational systems in very interesting ways. One last thing. You know, 80% of a child's life is spent outside of schools. When you actually count up all the hours, and of course they're sleeping for a portion of that, or hopefully they're sleeping. I mean, 80%. So going back to the physical planning that was brought up before, there is now evidence that the way we design our physical spaces affects motor and other skills of kids between the ages of 0 and 5. I mean, so the scientists know this, it's all been sorted out. We haven't really implemented that yet, really anywhere at scale. Why not do it here, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing where you could really, literally remake a downtown, not just for the millennials or those attending, you know, the university a block away, but for kids at all these different age sets, make it playful. And you could do this in the physical. You know, it's basically taking transit stops and making them into puzzles, you know, that kids have to sort of, while they're waiting for the bus or the transit, sort of figure it out. I mean, it's all basically been proved, and the question is just how do you sort of replicate it? So it's not just the interaction with formal education. It's the interaction with informal education that potentially can be invented and applied in a place like this.
My name is Drake Zimmerman. I own a business in town, and I'm active in a lot of these community and other organizations that you talk about. One of the things that Bloomington Normal has is its size. And we also have a huge number of well-educated, highly experienced leaders who can clearly and easily get together. We don't necessarily know all of each other, but at any given table around here, any one of us might sit down and we know at least one of the people or several of the people. We have a room full of leaders right here. We have that capital, that capital here that can do something. What are the characteristics of the leaders, and what might we do to bring ourselves together? We've already seen a few examples of us bring ourselves together, but we're at a unique opportunity, both in time and in capital, that we could network ourselves together. So what advice would you give us, and what characteristics of those leaders would you like to see?
I think that's a great question, because again, I mean, all this essentially is driven by networks of leaders. Some are in these bigger institutions like the universities and the community colleges and the companies, and some of them are just entrepreneurs themselves, or merchants, business owners, et cetera, and government, right? So perfect is the enemy of the good. Let's just put that out there. I mean, there's like a perfect kind of planning process that all of us it would exhaust everyone in this room. Do not do that, right? I would say do a quick audit of your assets. You've already done it. I mean, I saw your economic development strategy, all right? I mean, like, you've already done a lot of this work. You've already done the number crunching. You already have a sense of what is your competitive advantage, what's your reason for being. So go through with that with an eye towards, okay, what are the sort of fast, quick, easy moves you can make, right, around bolstering your innovation hubs. I mean, you already have a bunch of these co-working spaces, right? So what are the moves you can really get that to 2x or 3x? Because it's really important to have those hubs, and really important to have them programmed, and really important to have them be seen as vibrant magnets for entrepreneurs and investors and students and faculty. So you want to make that into a special place enmeshed in your quality downtown. Some of the placemaking work, again, you've already done a lot of the planning, so now you're just at execution stage, right? And you're at revenue raising cap, but some of this is not that expensive when it really comes down to it. But I would say the audit of your assets and getting, let's say, 5 or 7 people to get in a van and go to 1871 and go down to Cortex and go to Indianapolis. I mean, just create a task force of 5 or 7 people from the various anchors and from anyone who's got a pulse, essentially, right, and really wants to do this. Go and check this other stuff out. Come back, have a meeting like this. Okay, we have a task force. Here are the 7 things we took away from looking at these cutting edge places and cutting edge institutions. Here's how we apply it back to Bloomington Normal, right? I think you can do that in 3 months. I mean, I think we live in a world where there's like an older model where it's almost like textbook, do this, do that, exhaust yourself, go to Washington, nothing happens. Over. I wrote a book called The Metropolitan Revolution, which basically says, in this century, the people in this room are going to decide the future of your place, not the people that we elected to go to DC or to Springfield. It's just reality. I mean, the United States government, the federal government, has become a healthcare company with an army. So everything else is essentially happening here. So I'd say set up that process. Just raise your hand, 7 to 10 people, do a task force, go look around, come back, audit your assets, do 2 or 3 things. Because when you do 2 or 3 things and they begin to catch, then you're going to want to do more. And that's really what's happening in these hubs. It's nothing more complicated than that.